The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside the dusty trading post in Verdi, Nevada, and Katherine Jameson knew with absolute certainty that she had made either the bravest or most foolish decision of her 22 years on this earth. She clutched her worn carpetbag to her chest as the driver helped her down, her practical gray traveling dress already covered in the fine red dust that seemed to coat everything in this God-forsaken corner of the American frontier. It was September of 1878, and the harsh afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small cluster of buildings that made up what the locals generously called a town. Katherine squinted against the glare, searching for the man who had written her such thoughtful letters over the past 6 months, the man who had sent for her to become his wife, despite never having laid eyes on her in person. Her stomach twisted with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Back in Philadelphia, becoming a mail-order bride had seemed like a romantic adventure, an escape from the suffocating expectations of her aunt's household and the parade of unsuitable suitors who cared more about her modest inheritance than about her as a person. But now, standing in the middle of this rough frontier settlement with mountains rising in the distance and nothing but sagebrush stretching to the horizon, she wondered if she had traded one form of imprisonment for another. "Miss Jameson." A deep voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Katherine turned and felt her breath catch. The man approaching her was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His eyes were a striking shade of green, startling against his tanned face, and there was a wariness in them that matched what she felt in her own heart. He wore dusty work clothes, leather chaps over worn denims, and a blue cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. A battered hat hung down his back on a leather cord. "Mr. Irving," she managed, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. "Ethan," he said, removing his hat completely in a gesture of respect. "Ethan Irving. Welcome to Verdi, Miss Jameson. I hope the journey was not too difficult." His letters had been articulate and thoughtful, filled with descriptions of his ranch and his hopes for the future, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of him. He was younger than she had imagined, perhaps 27 or 28, with an honest face that showed both the hardness of frontier life and something gentler underneath. "Please call me Katherine," she said, attempting a smile. "And the journey was long, but I am here now." An awkward silence stretched between them as they stood in the dusty street. Two strangers bound by letters and promises, about to embark on the most intimate of partnerships. Katherine could feel the curious stares of townspeople as they passed, and she knew the arrival of Ethan Irving's mail-order bride would be the talk of Verdi for weeks to come. "I have a wagon just over here," Ethan said finally, gesturing toward a sturdy buckboard hitched to 2 patient horses. "The ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. I thought perhaps we could stop at the Reverend's house on the way if you are agreeable and have the ceremony performed. Unless you would prefer to wait, to have more time to decide." Katherine heard the uncertainty in his voice, the fear that she might take one look at this rough country and flee back to civilization. But she had not come all this way to turn coward now. She had made her decision months ago when she first answered his advertisement in the newspaper. "Today would be fine," she said, lifting her chin. "I am not one to delay what needs to be done." Something that might have been relief or perhaps respect flickered across Ethan's weathered face. He took her carpetbag and offered her his arm, helping her toward the wagon with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. As they walked, Katherine noticed the way other men nodded to Ethan with clear respect, and how women offered her tentative smiles of welcome. "I should tell you," Ethan said as he helped her onto the wagon seat, "the ranch is not much yet. I have been working it for 3 years, building it up from nothing. The house is small but sound, and I have plans to expand it. The cattle are healthy, and I have good grazing land. It is a hard life, Catherine. I will not lie to you about that. But it is honest work, and I believe we can make something good here if we are willing to try. Catherine settled her skirts around her and looked at this man who was about to become her husband. There was an earnestness to him that she found both endearing and reassuring. Whatever else might be uncertain about her future, she did not think Ethan Irving was a cruel man or a dishonest one. "Your letters were very clear about the realities of frontier life," she said. "I did not come here expecting luxury or ease." Ethan climbed up beside her and took the reins, urging the horses into motion. As they rolled through the small town, Catherine took in the details of what would be her new home. There was a general store, a saloon, a small church with a modest steeple, a blacksmith shop with its forge glowing hot even in the afternoon heat, and perhaps 24 other buildings in various states of repair. It was nothing like Philadelphia, with its cobbled streets and grand buildings, but there was an energy here, a sense of possibility that had been missing from her old life. "Tell me about your family," Ethan said as they left the town behind, following a rutted road through the scrubland. "Your letters mentioned an aunt." "My parents died when I was 16, Catherine said, the old pain dulled by time but never fully gone. "Yellow fever. My aunt took me in, but she has 5 children of her own, and I was more of a burden than a blessing. She made it clear that I needed to find a husband quickly, before I became a permanent fixture in her household." "I am sorry about your parents," Ethan said quietly. "Mine are both gone as well. My father died in the war fighting for the Union. My mother passed 2 years after, from grief as much as from the consumption. I had a younger sister, but she married a merchant and moved to San Francisco. We exchanged letters, but I have not seen her in 3 years. The shared understanding of loss created an unexpected bond between them. They were both orphans in their way, both trying to build new lives from the ruins of old ones." As the wagon rolled on, Catherine found it easier to talk, to share small details about her life in Philadelphia, her love of reading, her skill with a needle and thread. Ethan, in turn, told her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in Nevada's harsh climate, about his dreams of building something lasting. "There is one thing I should confess before we reach the Reverend's house," Catherine said suddenly, her courage nearly failing her. "I fear I may have misled you, though not intentionally." Ethan glanced at her, concern creasing his brow. "What is it? In my letters, I may have given you the impression that I was accomplished in all the domestic arts," she said, her cheeks burning. "The truth is, my aunt never allowed me near the kitchen. She said I was too clumsy, that I would ruin good ingredients. I can sew and clean and manage household accounts, but I cannot cook, Ethan. I have never prepared a proper meal in my life." She held her breath, waiting for anger or disappointment. Instead, Ethan did something that surprised her completely. He laughed, a rich, warm sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "Is that all?" he said, his green eyes crinkling at the corners. "Catherine, I will confess something to you as well. I have been living on burnt bacon and hard biscuits for 3 years. My cooking is so poor that even the ranch hands refuse to eat it. Then we will learn together now. If we are going to starve, at least we will do it side by side." The tension that had been coiled tight in Catherine's chest suddenly loosened, and she found herself laughing too, the sound bright and surprised in the desert air. There was something liberating about this moment, about laying bare their inadequacies and finding acceptance instead of judgment. "You must think me foolish," she said, wiping at her eyes. "I think you are brave, Ethan said seriously. It takes courage to travel halfway across the country to marry a stranger. It takes even more courage to admit your fears. We will figure out the cooking, Katherine. I promise you that. They reached a small homestead where the Reverend lived with his wife, a plump woman with kind eyes who insisted on witnessing the ceremony. The wedding itself was simple and brief, just the exchange of vows and rings, but when Ethan slipped a plain gold band onto Catherine's finger and kissed her gently on the lips, she felt the weight of what they were promising each other. This was real now, binding and permanent. The Reverend's wife pressed a wrapped package into Catherine's hands as they prepared to leave. "A few things for your pantry," she said with a warm smile. "And do not hesitate to call on me if you need advice. We frontier wives must help each other." As they continued toward the ranch, Katherine felt the reality of her new situation settling over her. She was married now, wed to a man she had known for less than 3 hours, heading toward a home she had never seen. But when she glanced at Ethan, at the strong line of his jaw and the determined set of his shoulders, she felt something that might have been hope stirring in her chest. The ranch, when they finally reached it, was both better and worse than she had imagined. The house was indeed small, just 4 rooms built of rough-hewn timber, but it was solid and well-maintained. There were corrals and outbuildings, a barn that looked relatively new, and grazing land that stretched toward the mountains. A small creek ran along the western edge of the property, providing precious water in this dry country. "It is not much," Ethan said, helping her down from the wagon, "but the land is good, and the water rights are secure. I have 50 head of cattle right now, and I am building the herd slowly. In a few years, this could be a prosperous spread." "It is ours," Katherine said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "That makes it beautiful." Ethan carried her bag inside, and Katherine got her first look at what would be her home. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace taking up most of one wall. There was a bedroom with a simple bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a small room that Ethan used as an office, and a storage room. The furnishings were sparse but functional, and everything was surprisingly clean for a bachelor's household. "I have been sleeping in the office," Ethan said, his ears turning red. "I thought you might prefer privacy until we are more comfortable with each other." Katherine felt a rush of gratitude for his consideration. She had been dreading this aspect of her new marriage, the physical intimacy with a stranger. That Ethan was willing to give her time spoke volumes about his character. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is very thoughtful." "Are you hungry?" Ethan asked, clearly eager to move past the awkward moment. "We could attempt to make supper together, put my promise to the test." Despite her exhaustion from travel, Katherine found herself nodding. "Yes, let us see just how poor our combined cooking skills truly are." They unwrapped the package from the Reverend's wife and found bacon, eggs, flour, and a jar of preserves. Ethan built up the fire in the stove while Katherine examined the kitchen area, familiarizing herself with the layout. There was a pump for water right inside the house, which Ethan explained he had installed himself, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. "I usually just fry the bacon until it is black and crack eggs over it," Ethan admitted, pulling out a heavy iron skillet. "The result is edible barely." "Perhaps we are approaching this wrong," Katherine said, studying the ingredients. "My aunt used to complain that I could not follow simple instructions, but I can read. Do you have any cookbooks?" Ethan's face lit up. "My mother's cookbook is in the office." She was an excellent cook, and she recorded all her recipes. "I never thought to actually use it." He retrieved a worn leather-bound book, and Katherine opened it reverently. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, recipes for everything from simple breakfasts to elaborate Sunday dinners. There were notes in the margins, little tips and suggestions that painted a picture of a woman who had loved her kitchen work. "Your mother had beautiful handwriting," Katherine observed. "She was a school teacher before she married," Ethan said, looking over her shoulder. "She believed in the power of education, even for women. Especially for women," she used to say. Katherine found a recipe for bacon and eggs that seemed manageable, with instructions clear enough even for complete novices. Working together, with much consultation of the book and more than a few mishaps, they managed to produce a meal that was actually edible. The bacon was only slightly burnt, the eggs were cooked through without being rubbery, and the biscuits they attempted from another recipe were lopsided but tasty when slathered with preserves. As they sat at the small table eating their imperfect meal, Katherine felt something shifting inside her. This was nothing like the formal dinners she had endured at her aunt's house, where every course was perfectly prepared by servants and conversation was stilted and proper. This was real, two people working together, laughing at their mistakes, celebrating their small victories. "This is the best meal I have had in years," Ethan said, and the sincerity in his voice made Katherine's throat tight with emotion. "You are easily pleased," she teased, but she felt warm with the compliment nonetheless. They cleaned up together, and Katherine appreciated that Ethan did not expect her to do all the domestic work simply because she was the woman. He pumped water, he scrubbed dishes, he put things away in their proper places. It spoke of a partnership she had not dared to hope for. As darkness fell over the ranch, Katherine felt the exhaustion of the long day catching up with her. Ethan showed her where everything was, brought in more firewood, and made sure she had everything she needed for the night. "Sleep well, Katherine," he said from the doorway of the bedroom. "Tomorrow I will show you around the ranch properly, introduce you to the hands. But for tonight, rest. You have earned it." After he closed the door, Katherine changed into her nightgown and climbed into the unfamiliar bed. Through the walls, she could hear Ethan moving around in the office, settling in for the night. Outside, the sounds of the frontier night filtered through the windows, crickets and distant coyotes and the whisper of wind through sagebrush. She had done it. She had traveled across the country, married a stranger, and begun a new life in a harsh and unforgiving land. The future was uncertain, filled with challenges she could barely imagine, but as she drifted off to sleep, Katherine realized she was not afraid. For the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning, Katherine woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. She dressed quickly in one of her practical work dresses and emerged to find Ethan already up, attempting to replicate their success from the previous evening. "I thought we could have breakfast before I show you around," he said, looking up from the stove with a sheepish expression. "Though I fear I am making a mess of it without your supervision." They worked together again, and Katherine found the process slightly easier this time, as if some part of her brain was beginning to understand the logic of cooking. The eggs were better than yesterday, the bacon less charred, and the coffee, while strong enough to strip paint, was drinkable. After breakfast, Ethan took her on a tour of the ranch. He introduced her to his two ranch hands, Hector and Sam, weathered men in their 40s who had been helping him build the spread from the beginning. They greeted Katherine with polite respect, though she could see the curiosity in their eyes. "Hector's wife Rosa lives in town," Ethan explained as they walked toward the pastures where the cattle grazed. "She does laundry and occasionally brings out meals for the men. I thought perhaps you might like to meet her, have another woman to talk to." Katherine appreciated his thoughtfulness. The isolation of ranch life was already apparent, and the idea of having a female friend nearby was comforting. The land itself was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way. The mountains rose purple in the distance, and the morning light painted everything in shades of gold and red. Ethan explained the water rights, the grazing patterns, the challenges of keeping cattle healthy in Nevada's extreme climate. He spoke with passion about his plans, his dreams for expanding the ranch, and Katherine found herself caught up in his vision. "I want to build something that lasts," he said as they stood looking out over his modest herd. "Something my children and grandchildren can be proud of." The mention of children made Katherine's cheeks warm, but she did not look away. "That is a worthy goal," she said quietly. Over the following weeks, Katherine settled into the rhythms of ranch life. She and Ethan continued their cooking lessons, working through his mother's cookbook with determination and an increasing amount of success. They burned things and oversalted things, and occasionally created meals that neither of them could identify. But they also had triumphs. The first time Katherine successfully baked bread from scratch, following the cookbook's detailed instructions, Ethan's pride in her accomplishment was so genuine and heartfelt that she found herself near tears. They learned other things too, beyond cooking. They learned how to work together, how to anticipate each other's needs and movements. They learned to communicate, sometimes with words and sometimes with just a look or a gesture. Katherine learned the rhythms of the ranch, when to have meals ready, how to help with smaller tasks, how to manage the household accounts and supplies. But more than that, they learned each other. Katherine discovered that Ethan was a morning person who woke with the sun, that he loved to read but rarely had time for it, that he had a dry sense of humor that caught her by surprise and made her laugh. Ethan learned that Katherine was stubborn when challenged, that she had a talent for organization, that she hummed old hymns while she worked. The physical distance between them began to close naturally, without force or pressure. Ethan would touch her hand while passing her something at dinner. Katherine would brush dust from his shoulder when he came in from work. They stood closer when working together in the kitchen, their bodies growing accustomed to each other's presence. One evening about a month after Katherine's arrival, they were preparing dinner together when the knife Katherine was using slipped and cut her finger. It was not deep, but it bled freely, and Ethan immediately took her hand in his, wrapping it in a clean cloth and applying pressure. "Hold still," he said, his face close to hers as he examined the wound. "It is not bad, but we should clean it properly." He pumped water and gently washed her hand, his touch careful and tender. Katherine found herself watching his face, the concentration in his eyes, the gentleness in his strong hands. When he looked up and met her gaze, something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the feelings that had been growing steadily stronger. "Katherine," he said softly, still holding her hand, "I know we married as strangers for practical reasons, but I want you to know that you have become dear to me. These past weeks, getting to know you, working beside you, it has been the happiest time I can remember." Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "I came here expecting duty and obligation. I did not expect to find a true partner, someone who makes me laugh and challenges me and treats me with such kindness." Ethan reached up with his free hand and gently cupped her cheek. "May I kiss you? Truly kiss you, not just the polite peck from our wedding." In answer, Katherine leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tender at first, tentative, but it deepened quickly as weeks of growing attraction found expression. Ethan's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Katherine melted into his embrace, her hands fisting in his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the day you arrived," he admitted. "I wish you had done it sooner," Katherine said, making him laugh. That night, when it was time for bed, Katherine paused at the bedroom door. "You do not have to sleep in the office anymore," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. "If you do not want to." The joy that lit Ethan's face made her certain she had made the right choice. Their wedding night, delayed by mutual consent and consideration, was everything Katherine could have hoped for. Ethan was patient and gentle, taking time to ensure her comfort, and Katherine discovered that the physical intimacy between husband and wife could be beautiful when built on a foundation of genuine affection and respect. As fall deepened into winter, Katherine and Ethan's marriage grew stronger. They worked together on the ranch, partners in every sense of the word. Katherine learned to help with smaller tasks like feeding chickens, which Ethan purchased at her suggestion, and tending a kitchen garden they planned for spring. She also took over the household accounts completely, her neat figures and careful management saving them money. In December, Rosa invited Katherine to a Christmas gathering in town, and Katherine convinced Ethan to attend. It was her first real social event in Verdi, and she was nervous about how the townspeople would receive her. But the frontier had a way of breaking down the formal social barriers she had known in Philadelphia. The women welcomed her warmly, sharing advice on everything from dealing with Nevada's harsh winters to the best way to remove cattle smell from clothing. The men treated Ethan with respect, and several mentioned how much happier he seemed since Katherine's arrival. At the gathering, Katherine met Emily Chen, whose parents had come from China to work on the railroad and who now ran a successful restaurant in Verdi. Emily, sensing a kindred spirit, pulled Katherine aside and offered to teach her some Chinese recipes. "Your husband comes into town sometimes looking like he would eat his own boot if it were cooked right," Emily said with a conspiratorial smile. "But I hear you two have been learning together. That is good. That is how marriage should be." Katherine gratefully accepted the offer, and over the winter months, she made regular trips into town to learn from Emily. The Chinese recipes were different from anything in Ethan's mother's cookbook, but they used ingredients they could get from the general store or grow themselves. Katherine's cooking improved dramatically, and more importantly, she gained a true friend in Emily. Winter in Nevada was harsh but beautiful. Snow dusted the mountains and occasionally covered the ranch itself. Ethan taught Katherine to ride, patiently working with her until she could handle a horse with confidence. They rode out together sometimes in the afternoons, just the two of them, exploring the land that surrounded their home. On these rides, they talked about everything and nothing. Ethan shared stories from his childhood before the war tore his family apart. Katherine told him about her parents, keeping their memory alive through her words. They discussed their hopes for the future, the improvements they wanted to make to the ranch, the family they hoped to have. "I want our children to grow up knowing they are loved," Katherine said one day as they paused to rest the horses on a ridge overlooking the ranch. "I want them to see their parents working together, respecting each other. I want them to know that love is not just something that happens to you, but something you build with patience and care." Ethan reached over and took her hand, their horses standing side by side. "They will know," he said, "because we will show them every day." Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers covering the desert, and Katherine threw herself into planting her garden. Emily had given her seeds for vegetables that grew well in Nevada's climate, and Rosa contributed seedlings she had been nursing. Katherine worked the soil with determination, and Ethan built protective fencing to keep out rabbits and deer. Who would have thought the Philadelphia lady who could not cook would become such an accomplished frontier woman? Ethan teased as he watched her expertly setting out tomato plants. Who would have thought the cowboy who lived on burnt bacon would be eating dumplings and stir-fried vegetables? Katherine countered, throwing a clod of dirt at him playfully. In late spring, Katherine began to suspect she was pregnant. She said nothing at first, wanting to be certain, but when her monthly courses were late for the second time and the morning sickness began, she could no longer deny it. She told Ethan one evening after dinner, simply and directly. "I am going to have a baby," she said. "Sometime in early winter, I think." The expression on Ethan's face cycled through shock, joy, wonder, and finally fierce protectiveness. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I am terrified and excited and completely happy," Katherine admitted. "Are you?" "I am the luckiest man alive," Ethan said, pulling back to look at her face. "A year ago I was alone, barely scraping by with nothing but dreams and hard work. Now I have you and we are going to have a child. Katherine, you have made my life complete." The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was oppressive, and Katherine's morning sickness lasted well into her 4th month. But Ethan was attentive and supportive, taking over more of the household tasks and insisting she rest when she needed to. Rosa visited often, bringing advice and reassurance, and Emily made special teas that helped with the nausea. As Katherine's belly swelled with new life, the ranch prospered. The cattle herd grew, and Ethan was able to sell several head at good prices. With the money, he hired an additional ranch hand and began work on expanding the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room. "We will need the space," he said, his hand resting gently on Katherine's rounded stomach. "This is just the first of many children, if God is willing." In November, as the first real cold of winter set in, Katherine went into labor. Rosa and Emily were both there, along with the doctor from Verdi, and after 12 hours of hard work, Katherine delivered a healthy baby boy. Ethan, who had been pacing outside like a caged animal, was finally allowed in to meet his son. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face as he looked at the tiny, red-faced infant in Katherine's arms. "Katherine, you are amazing. Look at what we made together." They named him Thomas, after Ethan's father, and Samuel, after Katherine's. The baby was loud and demanding, keeping them both up at all hours, but neither of them minded. Ethan proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, changing diapers without complaint, and looking at his son with such profound love that it made Katherine's heart ache. The first year of Thomas's life was challenging but joyful. Katherine learned to manage motherhood while still helping run the ranch, and Ethan learned to balance his work with being present for his family. They still cooked together most evenings, now with a baby on Katherine's hip, and they still found time to ride out together, with Thomas secured in a carrier on Ethan's back. The ranch continued to grow. Ethan's careful management and hard work were paying off, and by the time Thomas turned 1, they had nearly doubled their cattle herd and were making real profits. They paid off their debts, improved the house further, and even began saving money for Thomas's future education. On their 2nd wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Katherine with a gift. It was a beautifully bound book with blank pages, and on the first page he had written in careful script, "The Irving Family Cookbook, begun by Martha Irving, continued by Katherine Irving." "I thought you might want to add your own recipes," he said. "The things Emily has taught you, the dishes we have figured out together. Someday, Thomas will give this to his wife, and our grandchildren will eat the meals we learned to make together." Katherine threw her arms around his neck, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. It was not a cookbook to him, she realized. It was a symbol of their journey together, of how they had built their life side by side, learning and growing and creating something beautiful from nothing. The second pregnancy came when Thomas was 2 years old, and this time Katherine knew what to expect. The baby, another boy they named Daniel after no one in particular, but simply because they liked the name, arrived in early summer during a week of blazing heat. He was calmer than Thomas had been, with Ethan's green eyes and Katherine's dark hair. As the boys grew, Katherine and Ethan worked to build the kind of family they had both dreamed of. They taught their sons to read and write, to ride and rope, to cook and clean. Ethan never subscribed to the notion that certain work was beneath men, and Thomas and Daniel grew up understanding that a real man contributed to all aspects of running a household. "Your mother and I are partners," Ethan explained to Thomas one day when the boy was 6 and had questioned why his father was helping with laundry. "We both work hard, we both contribute, and we both do what needs to be done. That is what marriage is supposed to be." The ranch continued to prosper, growing into one of the most successful spreads in the region. Ethan took on more hands, built additional outbuildings, and even purchased adjoining land when it became available. But he never lost sight of what was truly important. Every evening, no matter how busy he was, he came home for dinner with his family. Every Sunday, they rested together, reading or riding or simply spending time in each other's company. Katherine's friendship with Emily and Rosa deepened over the years, and the three women became a vital support system for each other. When Emily's restaurant faced financial trouble, Katherine and Ethan were there with a loan. When Rosa's husband Hector was injured in a ranching accident, Katherine took in their children while Rosa nursed him back to health. This was what frontier life was really about. Katherine learned, not just surviving but building a community of people who supported and cared for each other. When Thomas was 8 and Daniel was 6, Katherine became pregnant again. This time, to everyone's delight, she delivered a daughter. They named her Martha Emily, after Ethan's mother and Katherine's dear friend, and the little girl wrapped both her parents and her brothers around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. "We have been blessed," Ethan said one evening as they sat on the porch together, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was teaching Daniel to rope a fence post while baby Martha gurgled happily in Katherine's arms. "More than I ever dreamed possible." "Do you remember our first meal together?" Katherine asked, smiling at the memory. "The burnt bacon and rubbery eggs." Ethan laughed, the sound warm and familiar after years of marriage. "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever met, confessing you could not cook, and then agreeing to try anyway. I fell in love with you that first day, Katherine, though I did not realize it then." "I fell in love with you when you laughed instead of being angry," Katherine admitted. "When you said we would learn together. That was the moment I knew we would be all right." As the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had left Philadelphia as a frightened young woman, desperate to escape a life that felt suffocating, and she had found so much more than she had ever hoped for. She had found a true partner in Ethan, a man who respected her, cherished her, and worked alongside her to build a life. She had found a home in this harsh but beautiful land, a place where she belonged. She had found friendship and community, and she had created a family built on love and mutual respect. The years continued to roll past, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. There were hard times, droughts that threatened the cattle and made every day a struggle, illnesses that swept through the region and left them terrified for their children's lives, economic downturns that tested Ethan's business acumen and Katherine's careful management. But they faced every challenge together, drawing strength from each other and from the solid foundation they had built. Thomas grew into a serious young man with Ethan's work ethic and Katherine's love of learning. Daniel was more adventurous, always pushing boundaries and dreaming of seeing the world beyond Nevada. Martha was stubborn and fierce, insisting on learning to rope and ride as well as any boy, while also mastering the kitchen skills her mother had worked so hard to learn. When Thomas was 16, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sensible girl named Alice who shared his practical nature. Katherine watched her eldest son navigate the early stages of romance and thought about her own journey to marriage, so different from the natural progression her children would experience. "You ever regret it?" Ethan asked her one night after they had sent the children to bed. They were in their bedroom, the room they had shared for nearly 18 years, and he was helping her brush out her hair, a nightly ritual they had developed over the years. "Coming here, marrying a stranger." "Never," Katherine said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You gave me a life I never could have had in Philadelphia. You gave me partnership and respect and love. You gave me these beautiful children and this home. How could I possibly regret any of it?" "I am the one who should be grateful," Ethan said, setting down the brush and turning her to face him. "You took a chance on a struggling cowboy with nothing but dreams and a burned dinner to offer. You made this house a home, Katherine. You made me a better man." They kissed, their affection for each other as strong as ever, tempered and deepened by years of shared experiences and mutual support. The physical passion that had grown between them in those early months had not faded, but had evolved into something richer and more profound, intimacy built on deep knowledge and abiding love. In 1895, 17 years after Katherine had first stepped off that stagecoach in Verdi, Thomas married Alice in a celebration that brought together people from across the region. The wedding was held at the ranch, and Katherine spent weeks preparing food with Emily's help, using recipes from the cookbook that had grown fat with additions over the years. As she watched her son exchange vows with his bride, Katherine reached for Ethan's hand. He squeezed her fingers gently, understanding without words what she was feeling. Their baby was grown, starting his own life, and it was both joyful and heartbreaking in equal measure. "We did well with him," Ethan whispered. "He is a good man." "He had a good example," Katherine whispered back. Thomas and Alice built a house on the far edge of the ranch property, and within a year, they had made Katherine and Ethan grandparents to a squalling baby boy. Holding her grandson for the first time, Katherine thought about the continuity of family, about how love and values passed from one generation to the next. Daniel, true to his adventurous nature, left home at 18 to see more of the country. He worked on various ranches and eventually ended up in Montana, where he wrote letters describing mountains that made Nevada's peaks look like foothills. Katherine worried about him, but Ethan reminded her that young men needed to find their own paths. Martha showed no interest in leaving, instead throwing herself into learning everything about running the ranch. She had inherited her father's head for business and her mother's organizational skills, and by the time she was 20, she was managing the ranch's books and helping make major decisions about the herd. "I do not understand why everyone assumes I will marry and leave," Martha said one day as she and Katherine worked together in the expanded kitchen, preparing dinner for the family. "This ranch is my birthright as much as it was Thomas's. Why should I not stay and help run it?" "You should do whatever makes you happy," Katherine said, looking at her fierce, independent daughter with pride. "The world is changing, Martha. Women have more choices now than they did when I was your age. If you want to run this ranch, then you should run it." Martha did eventually marry, at 23, to a man named Robert who understood and respected her attachment to the ranch. He moved into the main house with Martha, and Ethan taught him the ranching business, grateful to have another capable hand in the family operation. As the new century approached, Katherine and Ethan found themselves surrounded by family. Thomas and Alice had given them 3 grandchildren, and Martha and Robert were expecting their first. Daniel had finally returned from his wandering, bringing with him a wife from Montana and tales of his adventures. The ranch that Ethan had started with 50 head of cattle, and a dream now employed a dozen men, ran several hundred cattle, and was known throughout Nevada for the quality of its stock. The small 4-room house had been expanded and renovated multiple times, growing into a comfortable home that could accommodate their large and growing family. On Katherine's 50th birthday, Ethan surprised her with a party that brought together everyone who had been important in their lives. Emily and her family were there, Rosa and Hector, neighbors from surrounding ranches, people from town who had welcomed a frightened mail-order bride all those years ago. "I want to make a toast," Ethan said, standing with his glass raised. "To my wife, Katherine, who took a chance on a lonely cowboy who could not cook. You have been my partner, my love, my best friend for 22 years. You turned a house into a home, a struggling ranch into a legacy, and you gave me a family beyond anything I could have imagined. Everything good in my life began the day you stepped off that stagecoach." Katherine felt tears streaming down her face as everyone cheered and applauded. She looked around at the faces surrounding her, at her children and grandchildren, at the friends who had become family, at the husband who had kept every promise he made that day on the road to the Reverend's house. "I would do it all again," she said, her voice carrying across the room. "Every hard day, every challenge, every moment of fear and uncertainty, because it brought me here to this life, to all of you. When I left Philadelphia, I thought I was just escaping an unhappy situation. I did not realize I was running toward everything I had ever wanted." As the party continued late into the night, Katherine and Ethan slipped away to the porch, needing a moment alone together. They sat in the chairs they had occupied thousands of times over the years, looking out at the land they had built their life on. "Do you remember what you said that first day?" Katherine asked. "When I confessed I could not cook, I said we would learn together," Ethan replied, pulling her close. "And we did, Katherine. We learned to cook, and we learned to ranch, and we learned to be partners. But most importantly, we learned to love. Not the easy, instant love of storybooks, but the real, complicated, beautiful love that comes from choosing each other every day, from working through problems together, from building a life side by side." "That is the best kind of love," Katherine said, resting her head on his shoulder. "The kind that grows stronger with time, that deepens with shared experiences, that can weather any storm because it is built on a foundation of friendship and respect." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of family and celebration inside the house, the night sounds of the ranch around them, the whisper of wind through the sagebrush that had been the constant backdrop of their life together. Katherine thought about the girl she had been, stepping off that stagecoach with nothing but a carpetbag and a desperate hope for something better. She thought about the man who had greeted her, wary but kind, willing to take a chance on a stranger. Neither of them could have predicted the life they would build together, the love they would find, the family they would create. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Ethan asked. "For laughing when I confessed I could not cook. For saying we would learn together. For giving me the chance to become the woman I was meant to be. For loving me, not despite my flaws but with them. For every day of these 22 years." Ethan turned and cupped her face in his weathered hands, looking at her with eyes that still held the same warmth and affection they had shown on their wedding day. "Katherine Irving, you are the best decision I ever made, the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you more today than I did yesterday, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you, for however many years we have left." They kissed, there on the porch under the Nevada stars, two people who had started as strangers and become soulmates, who had learned together how to build a life, a home, and a love that would last forever. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren laughed and talked, surrounded by the warmth and security that Katherine and Ethan had created. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. And in the kitchen, the cookbook that had started with Martha Irving's careful recipes and continued with Katherine's additions sat waiting for the next generation to add their own discoveries. It had all started with a confession and a laugh, with a promise to learn together, and it had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. As they sat together watching the stars wheel overhead, Katherine and Ethan knew that their story, the story of the mail-order bride who could not cook and the cowboy who could not either, would be told for generations. A reminder that the best things in life are built together, one burnt meal and one shared laugh at a time. Years continued to pass, marked by the changing of seasons and the milestones of family life. Ethan's hair turned from dark to silver, and Katherine's face gained lines that told the story of years spent laughing and living. They grew old together, not with regret for lost youth, but with gratitude for every day they had been given. When Ethan turned 60, his children threw him a celebration, and he made them all promise to keep the ranch in the family, to continue building on what he and Katherine had started. Thomas, now the father of 5, assured him that the Irving Ranch would stand for generations. Martha, who had proven herself to be as capable a rancher as any man, had taken over much of the day-to-day management, allowing Ethan to slow down and spend more time with Katherine. They took long rides together in the afternoons, visiting favorite spots on the ranch, reminiscing about the years they had shared. "If I had it to do over," Ethan said one day as they sat by the creek where he had first shown her the water rights, "I would not change a single thing." "Well, perhaps I would have kissed you sooner," Katherine laughed, the sound as bright and genuine as it had been 30 years ago. "I wish you had too," she admitted. "But we got there eventually, and that is what matters." The grandchildren adored them, and Katherine took particular joy in teaching them to cook, using the cookbook that had become a family treasure. She told them stories about their grandfather learning to make bread, about the first time she had successfully prepared a roast without burning it, about how love and patience could turn even the most hopeless cook into someone capable. "Your grandfather and I started with nothing," she told them. "Not money, not skills, not even knowledge of each other. But we had determination and we had the willingness to learn together. That is the secret to a good marriage, to a good life. You find someone willing to learn with you, willing to fail with you, willing to grow with you. That is real partnership." On their 30th wedding anniversary, the family gathered again, 3 generations of Irvings celebrating the marriage that had started it all. Katherine and Ethan renewed their vows in a simple ceremony in the yard of the ranch house, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. "I, Ethan Irving, take you, Katherine, to continue being my wife," Ethan said, his voice strong despite his years. "I promise to love you, to learn with you, to laugh with you, for whatever days we have remaining. I, Katherine Irving, take you, Ethan, to continue being my husband," Katherine replied, tears streaming freely down her face. "I promise to be your partner, your friend, your love, until the end of our days." When they kissed, the family erupted in cheers and applause, and Katherine felt the weight of 3 decades of love and commitment in that simple gesture. They had built something remarkable, not through grand gestures or perfect moments, but through the accumulation of thousands of ordinary days, each one a choice to love and support and work beside each other. As the celebration continued, Emily pulled Katherine aside. The two women, both in their 60s now, had been friends for 3 decades, had supported each other through all of life's challenges and joys. "You did it," Emily said, hugging her friend tightly. "You built the life you dreamed of." "We both did," Katherine replied. "You with your restaurant, me with my ranch. We came to this frontier as young women and we made our marks. Remember when you could not even boil water without burning it?" Emily teased. "Remember when you taught me to make dumplings and I got flour everywhere?" Katherine countered, and they both dissolved into laughter, the easy laughter of old friends who had shared years of memories. As the years advanced, Ethan's health began to decline. He had lived a hard life, working the ranch for decades, and his body finally began to show the wear. Katherine nursed him through various ailments, just as he had cared for her through 3 pregnancies and countless illnesses over the years. They faced this final challenge the way they had faced everything else, together. On a warm spring evening in 1910, 32 years after Katherine had first arrived in Verdi, Ethan Irving passed away peacefully in his sleep, Katherine holding his hand. He was 62 years old, and he had lived to see his ranch prosper, his children grow into capable adults, and his grandchildren begin to have children of their own. The grief was overwhelming, but Katherine took comfort in the legacy they had built together. At Ethan's funeral, people came from across the state to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his fairness, his hard work, and his devotion to his family. Katherine stood at his graveside, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and spoke about the man she had loved for more than 3 decades. "Ethan Irving was my husband, my partner, and my best friend," she said, her voice steady despite her grief. "He took a chance on a mail-order bride who admitted she could not cook, and instead of being disappointed, he laughed and said we would learn together. That moment defined our marriage. We learned together, we grew together, we built a life together. He was a good man, a devoted father, and the love of my life. I am grateful for every day we had." After Ethan's death, Katherine continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by family. Thomas and his family moved into the main house with her, and Martha and Robert lived nearby. The ranch continued to operate successfully, now managed by the 2nd generation, and Katherine took pride in seeing her children carry on what she and Ethan had started. She spent her remaining years writing in the cookbook, adding not just recipes but stories and memories. She wanted future generations to understand where they had come from, to know the story of how their family had begun. "Your great-grandfather and I came from nothing," she wrote in an introduction meant for descendants she would never meet. "We were 2 lonely people who took a chance on each other, who chose partnership over pride, who built love from the foundation of mutual respect and shared effort. Remember this as you make your own way in the world. The best things in life are not given to you. They are built, day by day, choice by choice, with patience and love and the willingness to learn together." Katherine Irving lived to be 78 years old, surrounded by 3 generations of descendants at her death in 1924. She was laid to rest beside Ethan on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, and her children made sure that her gravestone told their story. Katherine Jameson Irving, beloved wife of Ethan Irving. She came to Nevada as a mail-order bride who could not cook and stayed to build a legacy of love. The ranch continued to operate for generations after them, just as Ethan had hoped. The cookbook was passed down through the family, each generation adding their own recipes and stories, but Catherine's introduction remained at the front, a reminder of where it all began. And in Verdi, Nevada, the story was told for decades afterward, becoming local legend. The tale of the mail-order bride who could not cook and the cowboy who laughed and said they would learn together became a symbol of what the frontier was really about, not just surviving, but building something new, creating family and home and love in a harsh and unforgiving land. Their great-great-grandchildren would grow up hearing the story, would learn to cook from the battered cookbook that had started with Martha Irving and been continued by Katherine, would understand that real love was not something that happened in an instant but something that grew slowly, nurtured by patience and commitment and the willingness to learn together. The ranch house still stood, expanded and modernized but retaining its original core, the 4 rooms where Katherine and Ethan had first learned to be partners. In the kitchen, above the stove, hung a framed photograph from their 30th anniversary, showing them standing together, silver-haired and weathered by years, looking at each other with unmistakable love and affection. And visitors to the ranch, hearing the story of how it all began, would smile and think about the courage it took for Katherine to confess her inadequacy, the kindness it took for Ethan to respond with laughter instead of anger, and the love that had grown from that simple moment of honesty and acceptance. In the end, that was the true legacy of Katherine and Ethan Irving, not just the successful ranch or the large family, but the example they set of what marriage could be when built on partnership, respect, and the willingness to face life's challenges together. They had started as strangers brought together by necessity and circumstance, and they had created something beautiful and lasting, proving that the best love stories are not about perfect people finding each other, but about imperfect people choosing to learn and grow together, one day at a time, for the rest of their lives.